How many of you recognize some of these images from this slide? Let me just see some hands. They were all featured on the news doing heroic acts, and their stories became manipulated. So quickly, Antoine Dotson saved his sister from being sexually assaulted. Sweet Brown had asthma and rescued herself from a fire, and Charles Ramsey rescued 2 kidnapped white children. And so in each of these instances, black heroism and their great storytelling was manipulated for profit. And this is part of a long history of the dehumanization of black people and images that cast us as being inferior. And so you can see here in popular culture, and particularly film, this is a constant narrative that's being portrayed. So from Hattie McDaniel's of Gone with the Wind or Birth of a Nation, even the use of blackface and even cartoons. And sometimes what happens in art influences what happens in real life. So why does this happen? So part of it is because, or at least in the contemporary sense, is because media is concentrated in the hands of just a few folks or a few corporations. And so as we can see from this chart, a few corporations own the majority of TV networks. And this expands out to radio and TV and to billboards and other newspapers, other communication media or methods. And so that's the big picture, but then when we get to the small picture, we can see how media can be manipulative. And so in this instance, if you were just looking at the screen, you might think that the victim is really the oppressor, or that the oppressor is the victim. And so while it's easy to catch it with a frame, with an image where something is cropped, it's often harder when we think of framing as a storytelling technique. And so if you think back to Kaepernick, initially it was about him protesting police brutality, and then somehow it became about him disrespecting the troops. And so part of that is the agenda setting function of media. And so by the selection of stories, the omission of certain stories or certain sources and voices, and then ultimately how those stories are framed, what we may consider reality or non-alternative facts becomes manipulated. It creates an agenda and it informs our perception of reality. And so switching a little bit to social media, many of these white supremacist ideas that are embedded in media have been internalized by black folks, and we now reproduce them. And so in this meme trope, there's a setup at the top, punchline at the bottom, and then you got some character in the center, and all of these have prints, and they're about lighter-skinned people being alleged, or men being either more feminine or more attractive. And so this idea, the closer you are to white, the more beautiful you are. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we see darker-skinned black people dehumanized and considered to be ugly or savage. So really quickly, where's he at? Prison, right? And we get that. He's swole up. He got a so-called wife beater. You can't see the color. It's orange. The room he's in, and he's trying to read. And so also struggling with 3-letter words. And so reproducing this idea of black people being ignorant or being savage. And so this meme was interesting. It's a different structure. It's a setup at the top and then a punchline at the bottom. And unlike a lot of other ones, you actually have a source for this meme. So this is from a tweet. And so when black people refuse to pledge allegiance to the flag, the Arthur trope, right? And so just by manipulating the color of the fist, it changes the meaning and context. And so there's a process we go through with young people, reading these memes and doing it collectively to increase our understanding. There's so many Kermit memes. This one was very popular last year, right? And so the inner dialogue, oh, this white man dropped his wallet. Maybe I should reparations now, right? And so even though it's cast as an evil Kermit, there's still an activist frame on this meme. And so bringing this real life issue and need about reparations to a conversation in a very popular meme at that time. So just looking at the top, what's wrong with this picture? And so if you understand the top, then you understand the meme on the bottom, popular song, Why You Always Lying. And so when you see the continued historic depiction of the ancient Egyptians or ancient Kemet being a so-called white civilization, the response is, why you always lying? And there's no words. It's just images constructed together to make a statement. So folks may know, speaking of historical inaccuracy, right? Ben Carson recently stated that the enslaved Africans were immigrants. And so this was one response. Someone saying, oh, he thinks this is Carnival Cruise. This is dehumanization, right? And one of the issues with framing that no one really talked about, they corrected him calling enslaved Africans immigrants, but no one said, no, they weren't slaves. They were human beings that were enslaved. So that slave narrative still being pushed, even in this meme. And so, what's the explanation? What happened? How could a black man say something so ignorant? Ben Carson is in the sunken place. And so this meme, pulling from a recent film, recent history, constructing this together to give an explanation that's humorous, but makes us think about why someone would say something like that. So there's interaction with real and false. And so just with this last slide, I just simply threw the word stay woke on top of a picture of Riley Curry and her father. I forgot that guy's name. Right? But the idea is that our brains process so much information in a short amount of time, we're not always consciously aware of the information that we're pulling in. So while you're scrolling and you're reading these things, you have to be aware that you can not only be feeding yourself stereotypical images, but then when you share it, you're also perpetuating the dehumanization of